Welcome back to the Healthy Skin Show. I'm Takashi, your host, helping you get clear skin and preaching to the world why food is the ultimate medicine. Today, I have a very special guest with me here today. Her name's Sarah Russo, and she is a writer, a cannabis consultant, and a social media and content manager who's worked on projects like Project CBD and the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. I recently read one of her articles on how cannabis can help with autoimmune conditions, and it really struck me because she writes about all these good things about CBD and THC and how it can help reduce inflammation in the body. So I reached out to Sarah to see if we could do a podcast, and she thankfully is joining me today. So thank you for joining, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
First, let's start with what your background is and when you first got interested in cannabis.
Sure. So I began using cannabis when I was a teenager, just because it's kind of what teens do. And initially was pretty surprised at the fact that it was illegal. I didn't really think of it as a medicine. It was more a recreational thing. Not that I see a difference between recreational and medicinal. It just, for me, I didn't really use it particularly as a medicine. And then I got into activism when I was 17. And I started thinking about the bigger picture and the government and how it's keeping us from using this plant, which made no sense to me and still doesn't. And so then I went to college and I pursued environmental studies and social justice, and had always gravitated toward herbal medicine and pursued that throughout my life, and did various research projects in college focusing on that. And then in 2010, I moved to California, and it's when Project CBD first started. So that was at that time when CBD was making a reintroduction in the grassroots cannabis supply. So Project CBD is an educational news service. So it focused on the reintroduction of CBD as a news story. So we were covering it, looking at what the science was saying. And at the time there was scientific research, but there wasn't as much as there is now. And then hopefully comparing that to what users were experiencing. And so basically at that time, the work was to try to promote CBD and to enable access for people so that they could start to study it and be able to use it and hopefully help them with various conditions. And then since then, I've worked with various groups, mostly focused around nonprofit work. And then I also worked at an herbal apothecary in the Bay Area, California. So not related to cannabis, but there were countless jars on the wall. And I think that one day cannabis will just be a jar among other plants, which I think its rightful place should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in your experience, how has cannabis affected your life and other lives that you've kind of worked with?
Well, I personally use cannabis to treat two chronic conditions that I have. And, I use it as part of my herbal medicine regimen. I, had previously approached different ways of trying to manage my health, and found that the herbal medicine is actually the most traditional form of medicine that we have, but modern medicine, if we want to call it that, the typical going to the doctor, treating the symptoms, and not really getting results. So, it leaves someone very frustrated, and it made me feel that, there might not be a solution to my problems. So turning to plant medicine has really been one of the things that's giving me hope and allowed me to heal. And cannabis, personally is one of the plants that I feel like I work with often, and is a major ally for me. And I use it for many different reasons and different times. And so I think that because the plant is so multifaceted, it has the ability to really work on so many different layers of human health. And so, that's from my personal experience. I could sing its praises all day, but I also want to mention that, you know, there's a lot of interest in cannabis now, which is wonderful because it is an amazing plant, but it's not something we should put on a pedestal, and it's not something that's going to be the cure all for every person. That being said, I have seen it help countless people, and this, you know, every day I hear different stories of how it's helped people for a wide range of conditions, and that's one of its many benefits, is that it can really act on many conditions, and some of them are very difficult to treat. So some conditions like epilepsy and some skin conditions, and they have a root and potentially an imbalance in the endocannabinoid system, and so cannabis can help to regulate the system and bring it back into balance. So that's invaluable, especially since when there are many different symptoms and situations in a given condition, because typical medicine usually just focuses on one symptom or one issue. And if many conditions such as autoimmune related disorders are very complex. And so generally speaking, you can just bring it back into balance. Hopefully with using plant medicine, and cannabis can be a benefit in that regard.
Yeah, totally. Your story is very similar to mine. I've seen multiple doctors and dermatologists about my skin, and all they did was just hand me more steroid creams. And I've used so many prescription drugs that they would give me. I've went on Accutane for acne, which is one of the most severe drugs you can take. And throughout this whole time, I was just relying on doctors because I didn't know any better. And now that I understand the science behind eczema and acne and psoriasis, and the science behind these prescription drugs, it's like once it clicks, then you just want to share it to the world, because everyone just has to know that food and plant medicine is a much better form of medicine and treatment than using prescription drugs. I mean, that's why I created the channel, and that's why I'm trying to help people with not only skin conditions, but with the inflammation that's been building up inside the body for for months, or for some people for years, and they just have never managed that inflammation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that plants, including cannabis, give us the power to take control of our own health and to treat ourselves. Granted, we do want to have the advice of professionals to weigh in and give perspective, but sometimes we feel when we have certain conditions that we're facing that we are powerless, or that we have to go to someone else to help us or give us a thing or put us on a prescription or give us steroid creams. And plants have the ability to help us heal and give our bodies the reminder, oh, okay, you don't need to have inflammation. We can lower that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I created a video about the anti-inflammatory effects of marijuana. And what I found was it reduces inflammatory cytokines, including interleukin-1 beta and TNF alpha. I talk about tumor necrosis factor a lot because it's one of the primary inflammatory cytokines that is causing too much of inflammation in the body. And then people are seeing symptoms, whether that's in the skin or in the joints or the muscles, wherever it is. Those are one of the factors. Initially, the inflammation is actually good because it's trying to fight off whatever is inside, whether that's antigens from food or from external factors, whether that's bacteria or viruses that are acting as pathogens. So initially, the inflammation is good, but sometimes the body doesn't know how to turn off that inflammation. So there's chronic levels of inflammation that's being produced by the body. And that's when you need an alternative form of treatment in order to suppress that inflammation and start healing the medical symptoms that you're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And cannabis in particular can help to regulate the inflammatory response. So if it's too high, it can bring it down. And if it needs a little boost, it can bring it up again too, to help the system function properly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just took edibles last night to help me sleep. And for me, I really enjoy the heaviness you feel when you're sleeping. But on the inside, you can almost for like now that I know the science, you can almost feel the inflammatory chemicals being reduced and suppressed in my body. It's
Mm,
kind of weird, but do you
that's cool. Yeah.
what's your favorite form to take? And
Well, to be honest, I use different methods for different situations. I take a cannabis oil, a couple drops, sometimes during the day, and because I really high amounts of THC are great for certain things, but if I have to work during the day, I'm not a functional stoner. I save that for after work is done, but I like to use a little bit to help regulate my body throughout the day. And then I also do enjoy occasional edible. I usually take about 5 milligrams max of THC with some CBD in there because, you know, I can handle more, but I just like to keep it manageable. So I don't know. I think less is more for me personally. And then I will say that I do love to smoke cannabis as well. And I think that smoking cannabis, why it's not for everyone, some people don't want to smoke, and that's fine. And if you're going to use it on an ongoing basis, it's probably best to vaporize it or use a alternative form. But to inhale the plant is actually the oldest way that the plant has been used. And I think it's a valuable form of medicine. And because it has a very quick onset. And so, for example, if someone has chronic pain and they're experiencing a strong sensation of pain, they can take a couple hits and it can sometimes bring down the pain threshold. And also, smoking enables people to titrate the dose so they can take a couple puffs and then feel the effects. Sometimes when we have edibles, we can get too much. And I don't know about you, but I've had many times where in the past where I've taken too much of an edible and like not been able to really function very well. So yeah, all the modes of administration are valuable for different things, and certain people might gravitate towards one over another. And that's good. I always tell people whatever mode that works best for them, you know. For example, that goes with any plant medicine. So for example, if someone hates taking pills and they have a hard time swallowing capsules, then capsules wouldn't really work well for them. Maybe a tincture or another form would be best. So it's nice to play around and experience different forms and find one that works best for you. And to what you said about the feeling the effect kicking in, I've started to notice that sometimes actually if I do yoga and I have a pretty consistent practice, and so sometimes if I take a little bit of cannabis before yoga, I'll start to notice that click moment where it just feels like you drop into your body and makes you feel really in touch with what the movements in your breath. So that's really cool. And it's good for exercise. There's a lot of groups of people that are starting to use it in conjunction with exercise to help boost the feel good chemicals in our body, like the endocannabinoid system. And the endocannabinoid and anandamide is actually what's responsible for that blissful feeling that we get when we run or do cardio exercise. So it's cool to experiment with that and see how it works.
mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was doing my research, you know, the scientists have discovered over 100 different types of phytocannabinoids, but most people know about THC and CBD. Have you done any research on the other cannabinoids and their therapeutic benefits?
I have, and I haven't done extensive research on the different types of cannabinoids, but there are the minor cannabinoids and the major cannabinoids. So the major cannabinoids would be CBD and THC, and the minor cannabinoids would be CBG, CBC, THCV, and a bunch of different ones. And so actually there's maybe even more cannabinoids that haven't been discovered yet. And so I think each one would be incredibly interesting to examine. And THCV, for example, the last time I was in California, I had an experience with a variety of cannabis that was dominant in THCV. And that's been investigated for metabolic conditions, which is really interesting because that can be very difficult to treat. And And when I used it, I felt it sort of had different layer of experience to it. It's sort of hard to describe, but it felt like an altered effect or a high, but then it kind of had a different level to it. So anyway, some of these cannabinoids, they have many different potential benefits. And I think we really have a lot to learn about the cannabinoids. And then that's not even to mention the terpenes that are involved in cannabis, which give the plant their smell, and they'll actually warrant the varying effect with different varieties of cannabis. So a lot of times people talk about indica or sativa as far as effect, but that's just a matter of taxonomy rather than effect. So actually the different levels of terpenes within the plant will give different sensations. So for example, myrcene is a compound that's found in cannabis and other plants that's responsible for that really sedating experience. And limonene, which is also found in cannabis in certain strains, and also citrus fruit, that has that uplifting and sunshiny experience. Also, linalool is another terpene that's found in lavender and certain types of cannabis that's relaxing and kind of gives you that antispasmodic effect as well. So for example, if cannabinoid testing and terpene testing of different strains, we're starting to see that, you might be able to predict a particular effect in a given cannabis chemovar. So that would be interesting to be able to just see the test results of a certain variety of cannabis and think, oh, okay, well, this might be good for energy. Like I want a limonene dominant cannabis variety, which I really like. I really like that fruity, kind of uplifting, energetic experience most of the time. And I'm actually pretty different than a lot of people. Actually, THC doesn't make me tired. If I cannot use cannabis before bed, no matter what kind of strain it is, it makes me feel awake and it activates my brain. So that just goes to show that every person's different, and this medicine is so complex, and as are we. So
Yeah. Where do you think the future of cannabis is going?
That's a really interesting question. I see it going many different ways, and then I can speak to that briefly, and then I can also speak to where I'd like to see it to go. Where I'd like to see it go is I'd like to really focus on the whole plant, so the different components in cannabis, and being true to the plant itself and not trying to take one compound like CBD or THC and, think it's the be all end all, it's great that CBD is so popular these days. However, I think we're, putting it on a pedestal. CBD is just one compound of thousands, maybe even more compounds in the cannabis plant. So I think it's essential to really focus on the whole plant and see what kind of, different experiences it can provide for different conditions. So to really focus on specific chemovars, otherwise known as strains. Actually, it's probably better to refer to cannabis chemovars or varieties as opposed to strains. Strains are more regarding bacteria or viruses. So to focus on different chemovars and see how they would benefit given conditions, because right now a lot of people, if someone has epilepsy, for example, it's a lot of experimentation to find what works for them. And so that can be challenging too. And once you find something that really works, you want to have consistency and be able to go back to and have the same results over and over again. So I think that standardization of cannabis products has gotten a lot better over the years, but we still have a long ways to go with that. And what I'm seeing a lot of now is this single compound products, or the trying to sort of reinvent the wheel and say, okay, well, yeah, nanotechnology, CBD, water soluble, blah, 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 blah. This is a special technology that we've developed. For me personally, that might be beneficial for someone, but I'm not interested in that. I want to stay as true to the plant as possible. And I think that that's actually going to be the most beneficial, because they've done studies looking at whole plant cannabis versus single compound cannabinoids and found that whole plant preparations are actually more effective. And I've heard that reported time and again in different users as well. And another place I'd like to see the cannabis industry go is to more sustainable methods of cultivation. For example, regenerative agriculture. So a lot of times cannabis is grown in a monoculture where you go into a cannabis grow, whether it's indoor, outdoor, and it's just weed. And that's not natural. That's not how plants work. And I feel like they're probably pretty lonely. So there are many groups that are working to bring cannabis into and cultivate it in a ecosystem where it can reside with other plants and it can actually leave the land in a better state than what it was before. So there are many groups working on that and regenerative agricultural practices and working with mushrooms to help build the soil. And it attracts beneficial pollinators like bees and birds to the gardens. And so that's a way to really revolutionize the cannabis scene and also to be good to the earth, because I think that if we're given this medicine from nature, that we need to return the favor. We can't just take. So we need to pay our respects as well.
In the States, so Sarah's in Spain right now. In the States, we have a lot of states legalizing medical marijuana, or some have legalized recreational. And eventually it's going to be the entire country. But who knows what the timeline is, but it's definitely, that's definitely the future for America. It should be in the hands of people who are in chronic pain, who have chronic inflammation in the body, and they just have no other way to treat it. All politicians need to see is like videos of people with epilepsy, and they take cannabis and they stop shaking. They stop having the epileptic attack. It's moving it to watch, and it's so powerful to see the benefits and how marijuana can be used as therapy for these patients.
Yeah, definitely. I think that patient testimony is still very profound and it should be encouraged as much as possible, because I think with any sort of activism, it's most effective when someone directly who's affected by it. So when you're campaigning or doing legislation, if a brother of someone who's in Congress has a chronic condition and they start using cannabis, that's a direct impact on that person and also the people that might have been previously not supportive of the plant. So I think that sharing the testimonies as much as possible is essential. And I do agree that I think eventually the United States, it will become legal federally. And that definitely needs to happen because right now there's a big disconnect between different states. And for example, on the West Coast, you have Washington State, Oregon, and California. Well, it's all recreational use, but you can't distribute products within those states. So that's a problem. And then you have some states that have these CBD only laws, which actually are a disservice to the patients because, CBD is helpful for many people, but actually CBD and THC work best in conjunction with one another. So some people would really benefit from having some THC or maybe some other cannabinoid dominant varieties of cannabis, and they shouldn't be limited. So it's kind of a cop out to just pass a CBD only law. It's not good enough, So, and because each state is different, there's problems in access within each state and then within the states together. So federal legalization needs to happen like it has in Canada. And Canada, still has its issues as well. But, honestly, when I was a teenager and I first started using cannabis, I never thought that we'd be at the point we are today. So it's really exciting to see that it's becoming more accepted throughout the world, but we still have a long ways to go. But we've come a long way as well. So it's important to recognize that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have CBD oil as well, and it's a full spectrum, which means the THC and the CBD kind of combine in order to enhance the effects. With cannabis companies, because it's illegal federally, they have trouble with banking and moving money. They can't grow as fast or as much as they would want to because of these federal regulations that are still in place, even though many states have legalized it.
Yeah, the banking issue is a huge problem, and it needs to be resolved. And I think any major bank in the United States that decides to take cannabis money would be really making a good decision, because a lot of companies in legalized states, they want to be able to conduct business normally and be able to do their taxes, and they have the exchange of money, and they want to be able to put in the bank, and they're just saying no, and that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, that's a major issue, as well as social equity in the cannabis space, so that enabling people that may have not had the same opportunity before to become involved, because cannabis has been such an avant-garde movement. It's been a lot of under the radar, and now that it's coming above ground, it's a really exciting opportunity for us to do things in a different way and to really set a different standard for the way things are. But with that comes the need for social justice within the cannabis space. So empowering people of color and women to become involved, I think, is essential as well, and to create equity within the cannabis industry. Because right now, there's a lot of opportunities, but it's not always a level playing field. So I'd like to see that change as well.
What's the legalization status of cannabis in Spain, and how is cannabis used differently or similarly to California?
That's a good question. Actually, we held an event last month in Barcelona. I work with the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, and we had intended to do an event just before Cannabis. So Cannabis is held in Barcelona every year, and it's the largest cannabis-related event in Europe. And it brings together many different people from all over the world. And why the event isn't specifically medically focused, we decided to use it as an opportunity to create our own event. So my friend Christine and I, we work at the organization together, and we did an event with ICEERS, which is a really amazing organization working to legalize plant medicines and conduct research. And we held the event 2 days before Cannabis. And so it was focused on medical cannabis models worldwide and the benefits of certain programs and the negative aspects of certain programs. So we talked about the California model, we talked about the Spanish model, Colombian model, and many other countries have different approaches to the way that they do things. But in Spain, there isn't an overarching medical law. So a lot of people think that it's semi-legal or it's legal in Spain. That's not the case. There's a legal loophole that enables people to join together in social clubs. They don't even have to be cannabis related. So there's a law in Spain that people can join together and form clubs. So that legal access loophole comes into play with cannabis social clubs, which are most heavily concentrated in Catalonia region of Spain, so where Barcelona is. And so what it is they are private groups of people that are allowed to cultivate for the membership. And so they can meet, and they sort of have a similar feel to a dispensary that you might find in California, although it's invite only. So it's not like you can just find the address and go and knock on the door and get in and find cannabis. You have to know someone who's a member of the club. So that's sort of limiting for some people. But at the same time, anyone who has a member friend can go and use it. And there's a great study put on by ICEERS that looked at the social club model in Spain and looked at the users, and they actually used it as an alternative to the illicit market. So people that went there, they were able to access cannabis in a safe way, and they gave them community. And the clubs aren't geared specifically toward medical use, but there are people that go there for medical use. And as I've said before, I don't see a difference between recreational or medicinal. And I don't think it's our place to try to put our ego upon the plan and say, oh, well, medical use is okay and recreational use isn't. I think whatever way someone decides to use a plant, that's their personal decision. And yes, we should respect the plant and we should use it responsibly, but we don't want to try to say the way that I use it should be the way that you use it. So yeah, in Spain, I would love to see legislation that legalizes it for medical purposes, and I hope that that's happening soon. There are actually some world-renowned researchers in the country that are doing really important work. So that's kind of interesting because the government enables it for research purposes to study it, but they don't allow the people to use it. So that's a problem. But slowly but surely, you know, things are changing in Europe, and we're going to see some shifts happening. And right now, just to speak to the current times, is that when we were at the event, our event happened on a Wednesday. There was another cannabis related event the next day, got canceled, and then Cannabis itself was canceled. So we had thousands of people in town for this event that wasn't going to happen. So a lot of the people involved in the cannabis space, they went to the cannabis social clubs. And so we were there, and then on a Friday was the last day. So they shut down the clubs because of the lockdown that was enacted across the country. And it's proved to become a problem because in the US, people, you know, different groups have come out and said that cannabis access points are an essential service, and they are. But in Spain, because it's sort of this legal gray area, people are having access issues right now. And so, you know, it's proving to be a problem for people because, you know, if someone has a consistent supply of medicine and it gets cut off, that's problematic. So it becomes a social justice and human rights issue at this point as well. So, I mean, we're all dealing with this in various ways. But I think that is all the more reason to examine this and create legislation to legalize it here and in the world.
Definitely, yeah. What are some of your favorite brands, and why do you like them?
Oh, my brands. Well, you know, having lived in California for so long, I developed quite a love for certain products, just because I think California has such an amazing variety. And I always like the novelty that California has, because every time I go back there, I'll be, you know, finding this new drink that comes out. I really enjoy Papa and Barkley as far as tinctures go. I think they have really amazing quality tinctures, and I love them. As far as flower, all the people involved in Northern California, in Humboldt and Mendocino counties, growing regenerative agriculture cannabis, I think that that's the ultimate top. I think that that's you know, that's what I think all cannabis growers should aspire to. So, for example, Moonmade Farms is one that I love. Madrone Farms is another. Flower Child is another company that I really love. They are on a break right now, I believe, the last time I spoke with them, because when California went from medical to recreational, it was hard for some small time producers to be able to get all the licensing and jump through all the legal steps to have to get licensing and come on board and things like that. And it's very costly. So they were on a break, which is unfortunate because their products are amazing. And they have these really wonderful salves that they infuse with other plants in cannabis, which I really love. And then Bebo is another brand that I like. They have these pastilles, so they're 5 milligram THC, and then they have a CBD variety. And I think, if I remember correctly, they use cold water hash, which I'm a fan of. I love hash. And then Ohm Edibles is another company based in California that has sipping cacao that's wonderful, and they have bath salts that are really nice. So yeah, those are some of the products that come to mind that I really like.
Yeah. If you're any of those companies, or if you're other cannabis companies watching this or listening to this, you can sponsor the show and send me an email. Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us. Where can people find you?
Okay, so I just launched a website called herbsfortheapocalypse.com, and it's actually self-empowerment through herbal medicine, resistance movements, and music and art. So it's a spin-off project from a graphic novel that I'm working on. So the website is www.herbsfortheapocalypse.com, and you can find me on the social media channels, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And then you can send me an email if you'd like at herbsfortheapocalypse@protonmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for Sarah. And yeah, until next time, everyone, please stay safe, please stay inside, and please stay healthy. And go smoke a joint during this quarantine. All right. Thank you for watching and listening. Taco is out.